Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes. To keep in touch with us, use our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, which are all at Q and Review. That's CUEANDREVIEW. Or get in touch via information@qandreview.com. That's information@CUEANDREVIEW.com. Please like and share our podcasts and give us any constructive feedback.
This article is from The National, date 20th May 2022, from the Politics section. Backroom deals by unionists show just how far Scottish Labour have fallen. By Richard Walker. It's hard to remember, but there was a time when the Labour Party saw it as part of its duty to speak up for Scotland and protect its people from the ravages of Conservative politicians determined to bring them low. Labour, then, was unchallengeable in Scotland. The party regularly won most Scottish seats in general elections, although even at its height it never matched the best electoral SNP performances of recent years. It ran most councils and most of the bigger councils. It portrayed itself as Scotland's champion throughout all the years of Conservative rule from Westminster. I remember Labour movement marches against the Tory poll tax, against financial cuts, against unemployment. At election after election, Scotland put its faith in Labour, despite the increasingly obvious fact that Westminster would never take properly Scotland's views into account, and simple arithmetic made it impossible to represent Scotland's best interests. And even as the argument began to take root that independence offered the only way for Scotland to influence its own future, Scottish Labour's ambition was to cling to power in a dysfunctional union rather than work for a fairer system. Labour, of course, will argue that it delivered devolution, resulting in the reconstitution of the Scottish Parliament and restoration of a carefully selected range of powers. However, devolution did not fundamentally alter the balance of power. The new arrangement was given by Westminster and could be taken away or changed by Westminster. The UK Parliament remained the sovereign power and in Labour's eyes would always remain so. The political landscape has of course changed since then. Today's Scotland is unrecognisable since the days of Labour dominance, and the Labour Party is unrecognisable too. This week, Nicola Sturgeon travelled to Washington to give the keynote speech on what was described as Scotland's role in securing European energy security. Reporting the trip earlier this month, The National said, as part of the talks, Sturgeon will look to offer insight into Scotland's role in tackling the global climate crisis, the benefits of transitioning to a greener economy, and what can be done to strengthen Scotland and Europe's energy security and self-reliance, particularly in relation to Russia's effect on the oil and gas industries. The event was hosted by the Brookings Initiative on Climate Research and Action, and a conversation was scheduled between the First Minister and Samantha Gross, Director of the Energy Security and Climate Initiative. Given Scotland's role in the oil and gas industry and its increasing role in renewable energy, you might think it entirely reasonable that it should be invited to contribute to this discussion. Indeed, in most countries in the world, it would be considered a privilege to be invited and regarded as an acknowledgement of its importance. Not in the UK, of course. The media reaction to the news was instructive. When the Tories described the First Minister's visit as an indie tour and accused her of promoting independence abroad at the taxpayers' expense, the unionist press used the claim in their headlines. The BBC's low-key, Some would say almost non-existent coverage of the visit came under fire, notably from the station's former head of news and current affairs in Scotland, Stuart Easton. On right-wing TV channel GB News, Dan Wootton described the trip as a wasteful attempt to draw attention to the independence cause. Hopefully you'll indulge me if I point out here that coverage like this proves yet again the advantages of having a pro-independence mainstream media voice, such as The National, to report events such as the Washington trip in the proper context. Without it, newspaper readers, and despite falling circulations there are still many thousands of them, would have no alternative to a wall of unionist propaganda on front pages across the land. The Conservative criticism of the trip was yet another example of the Scottish cringe, which considers any suggestion that Scotland ever deserves a place on the international stage as simply laughable. Tory constitutional spokesperson at Holyrood, Donald Cameron, seethed that the American visit was an example of the First Minister taking her eye off the ball when Scotland was facing a cost of living crisis, seemingly oblivious to the irony that said crisis was being botched by his own party. Among the outcry, copyright Daily Unionist, it would have been easy to miss a tweet from Frank McAveety, a Labour councillor in Glasgow and leader of Glasgow City Council from 2015 until 2017. He wrote, "The continuing and sad saga of woman who wandered around the fringes of COP26 a few months ago grabbing selfies and photographs, now on tour in Washington attempting the same shtick, it's a stunt." It was a desperate display of how far Labour has fallen that any sign of Scotland being taken seriously anywhere in the world has to be immediately held up to ridicule. Labour has every right to believe it would make a better fist of running Scotland than the SNP, but someone in its communications department must surely realise that denigrating the country so publicly and sneeringly is not the way to winning support for a party on which so many have turned their back. It's long past time to ask itself why so many of its former supporters would no longer touch the party with a very long stick. And before anyone argues that criticising Nicola Sturgeon isn't necessarily the same thing as criticising Scotland, they should bear in mind, 1, as the First Minister of Scotland, the country where COP26 was being held, no matter what crackpot argument Boris Johnson put forward to deny the obvious, Nicola Sturgeon surely had the responsibility to use an opportunity to raise the country's profile in the eyes of the world. 2, the fact is she did so remarkably well, should surely be celebrated than mocked. 3, to use COP26 and the Washington trip as political weapons against the First Minister, McAveety has first disparaged the very notion that Scotland had any right to be regarded highly at COP26 and at Washington. How else can he ridicule her ambitions to achieve that aim? Labour is now so desperate to score political points against the SNP that it regards any damage inflicted on Scotland as merely collateral in a wider tribal conflict. For proof, look no further than the party's disgraceful behaviour in the aftermath of the council elections earlier this month. After the scale of the SNP victory emerged, Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar emphatically ruled out coalition deals with other parties, either to keep out the SNP or to help it gain power in individual local authorities. To be honest, such a policy was itself pretty astonishing in that a Labour leader was admitting he would rather see the Tories running a council than work with the SNP to prevent it, but at least it had the benefit of consistency. The reality is that Labour has only been too happy to do deals with other parties, but only to damage the SNP. In South Lanarkshire, for example, Labour took control of the council with support from the Tories and the Lib Dems. despite the fact that the SNP was returned as the largest party. Yesterday, Labour took control of Stirling after Conservatives accepted its offer of the Provost's post in return for support. The party is also looking to run a minority administration in Fife, although the SNP won more seats. There was a time when Labour was clear about who represented the biggest threat to Scotland, and it wasn't the SNP. Since then, the Tories have not improved their performance. They have dragged us out of Europe against our will, inflicted untold damage on our economy, our export and many of our businesses. They have cut universal credit for our poorest families, who desperately need help. They have watched the cost of living crisis grow to dangerous proportions without lifting a finger to help in any meaningful way. If Labour truly think this is a party with which it should be doing deals and thus thwarting the democratically expressed will of the Scottish people just because it holds a grudge against the SNP, it should hang its head in shame. That article was by Richard Walker. This article is from The National, date 20th May 2022, from the news section. Scotland's 10 billionaires see combined wealth grow as cost of living crisis worsens. By Laura Webster. Scotland's 10 billionaires saw their combined wealth grow over the last year, the Sunday Times Rich List 2022 has revealed. The richest person in Scotland is fashion tycoon Anders Hall Poulsen, who owns popular brand ASOS. He is worth around £6.5 billion and saw an increase of £500 million since last year, the newspaper said. Meanwhile, owners of media firm DC Thomson, the Thompson family, have seen their fortune grow by £314 million since 2021. Also featuring on this year's Scottish list are new entrants, the Easdale brothers, who are worth about £1.3 billion. The pair were formerly directors of Rangers and have built their wealth through transport and property acquisitions. Half of the 10 saw their fortunes fall in the last year despite the headline figure. Glenn Gordon and family, who own spirits company William Grant & Sons, saw their wealth dip by about £200 million since 2021. Pharmaceutical giants Kiran Mazumdar, Shaw and John Shaw and family also saw their fortune fall by an estimated £400 million. The annual list reveals the wealth of the 250 richest people in Britain and published its 34th edition online on Friday. There are now 10 billionaires in Scotland, with head of Clyde Blowers, Jim McCall, coming in 11th place, having recently lost his billionaire status. Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling follows, with her wealth estimated to be around £870 million. Robert Watts, the compiler of the Sunday Times Rich List, said, Scotland's richest people have fared less well than those elsewhere in the UK, with half of this year's 10 Scottish billionaires seeing their fortunes fall over the past year. The combined wealth of the country's 10 billionaires is still up at nearly 2% on 2021. As the economy continues to work through the damage wrought by the pandemic, surging inflation and the disruption to markets caused by the war in Ukraine are now making the business environment difficult. Meanwhile, across the UK, most people are facing the biggest drop in living standards on record as the cost of living crisis hits hard. With inflation surging to 9%, the highest record since the Thatcher era, hundreds of thousands of people face being forced into destitution. Customer confidence is now weaker than at its lowest point during the global banking crisis or the COVID shutdown, as the cost of living pressures escalate, a long-running survey revealed on Friday. GfK's Consumer Confidence Index fell 2 points to -40 in May, its lowest score since records began in 1974. Pessimism is starkest in relation to the general economy, with consumer confidence falling to -63 looking back over the past year and -56 for the 12 months. That article was by Laura Webster.
The National, May 23. Boris Johnson must come before Parliament to explain rule breaking. Report by Craig Meechan. Boris Johnson must come before Parliament to explain his rule breaking after the Metropolitan Police concluded its investigation into Partygate, the SNP have said. Authorities handed out 126 fixed penalty notices to people, including the Prime Minister and Chancellor, who held and attended parties in Downing Street and Whitehall during lockdown when social distancing rules were in place. Sue Gray's report into Downing Street gatherings is now set to be published this week. It was previously delayed following the Met's decision to launch its own investigation. However, concerns were raised after it emerged that the civil servant had met with the Prime Minister. The meeting has prompted outrage from opposition parties, with Labour urging the Tories to urgently explain why it took place. A Number 10 spokesperson denied any interference in the looming report, adding that Johnson was not the one who called Gray in. SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford has demanded that the delayed report is published immediately and include the names of those within the UK government who broke the rules. The MP said it was beyond doubt that Boris Johnson misled Parliament over his involvement in the Whitehall parties. Blackford said, now that the police investigation into UK government lockdown parties has concluded, proving that Boris Johnson and his government woefully broke the rules they made and expected everyone else to follow, he must come before Parliament to explain his reckless conduct. The sheer scale of the Partygate scandal is jaw-dropping, with 126 fines issued to people within the UK Tory government, including to the Prime Minister and Chancellor. The SNP MPs said that while most people in the UK were following lockdown rules, members of the Tory government were partying and eating cake. And he continued, the Sue Gray report, which must be published today, and Privileges Committee investigation will set out its own further conclusions, but it is beyond doubt that laws were broken at Downing Street and the Prime Minister misled Parliament. For as long as Tory MPs allow Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak to remain in post, the Westminster government is continuing to stick two fingers up to all those who followed the rules and made sacrifices. It's time for Scotland to rid itself of this Westminster Tory government and the staggering sense of entitlement of those within it. Report by Craig Meechan. The National, May 23. Independent Scotland in EU would be welcomed by Europe, says French Ambassador. Report by Laura Webster. An independent Scotland joining the EU would be good for Europe, according to the former French ambassador to the UK. While the Catalan independence referendum previously made the conversation around Scotland joining the bloc more difficult, things have changed after Brexit, said Sylvie Berman. The former ambassador, who served in the role during Brexit, told the Herald on Sunday that Europe would now be very happy if Scotland opts to join the bloc after securing independence, as is the current SNP policy. However, she warned that the EU may put pressure on the country regarding its currency, although joining the euro is not an obligation upon entry to the bloc. In the interview, Berman was asked how the EU would feel about Scotland joining. The former diplomat said, "We will welcome it." It was more difficult during the referendum on independence because of the reaction of Spain due to the issue of Catalan independence. So at that time, maybe it would not have been so popular, but I think the situation has changed because there's been Brexit. She went on, "Probably there would be some negotiation, but Scotland joining the EU would be good for Europe. There's no reason why, if there's this referendum, which is accepted, that we shouldn't want to have Scotland. We'll be very happy." On the issue of currency, Berman said there are countries which don't opt to use the euro, but added that there would need to be an agreement with the Bank of England on Scotland keeping the pound. The current SNP policy is to keep the pound after independence, but not in a currency union. Party members have voted for a new currency to be brought in after independence as soon as practicable. On comparisons with Brexit, Berman said Scottish independence is a different situation, and she explained, "Scots wanted to remain in the EU, and that's one of the reasons why you didn't vote for independence in 2014. And so now, since the UK left the EU, the situation is totally different. Scotland voted for remaining, and so you're probably still furious." Berman also accepted that Irish reunification coming before Scottish independence is a possibility. The former ambassador's comments come after First Minister Nicola Sturgeon penned an exclusive article for the Sunday National, firing the starting gun on a fresh independence drive. The SNP chief, who wants to hold a referendum next year, pledged that a new independence perspective would be published shortly. Alan Smith MP said, "It will come as no surprise to anyone paying attention that Scotland is well thought of by our European friends and neighbours. Europe is good for Scotland, and Scotland is good for Europe. With the full powers of independence, Scotland can strengthen our bonds with our European neighbours and play our full part on the world stage." Report by Laura Webster. The National, May 23. Rees-Mogg accused of taking 4-day week after slating home workers. Report by Ninian Wilson. Jacob Rees-Mogg has been accused of taking a 4-day week after slamming workers who choose to work remotely. According to the Daily Record, a leaked email shows that Rees-Mogg, who is suspicious about working from home on Fridays, leaves his ministerial box in the office on that day. It comes after the Brexit Opportunities Minister left passive-aggressive notes on the desks of remote workers, which said, "Sorry you were out when I visited. I look forward to seeing you in the office very soon." SNP MP Pete Wishart said, "The hypocrisy is staggering. While Jacob Rees-Mogg has been quick to harass civil servants with notes on their desks, he must have forgotten to put one on his own as he rushes out for an early weekend." Rees-Mogg has been highly critical of remote working culture and has urged the rapid return of civil servants to their offices now that coronavirus restrictions have been lifted. The Tory minister joked people who work remotely during sunny weather might be heading off to watch cricket, and he said, "We're going to have to compare notes with the Met Office. We need to have the evidence on Lord's test matches and all that." Rees-Mogg also aimed a dig at the trade union that represents civil servants after it defended its members. He said, "There's a hard-working ethos in the civil service, unfortunately not represented by their trade union, which seems to want them to be in Tuscany to call into work. However, serious questions are now being raised over the Tory minister's work ethic following the leaked email. The end of the email says, "The minister does not take a box on Fridays." The box refers to the red boxes that ministers use to carry official documents and the work they need to carry out. This follows barbed comments from Rees-Mogg civil servants not being in the office on this day. May 23. The National. Sturgeon says, "I've been knocked for 6 by nasty COVID." Report by Abby Garton-Crosby. Nicola Sturgeon says she's been knocked for 6 over the weekend after testing positive for COVID-19. The First Minister revealed she had been experiencing mild symptoms on Friday evening, stating she would hopefully be back out and about later this week. But in an update today, the First Minister said she's having to remain at home with the nasty illness. Talking to Twitter, she urged people to get all doses of the vaccine if they have not already, adding that she feels extremely grateful to have been vaccinated. "Thanks for all the well wishes," she said. "The virus has really knocked me for 6 the past couple of days. So while I hope to be back fighting fit very soon, I'm having to stay at home for now." Once again, this time from personal experience, please do get all doses of vaccine if you haven't already. COVID can be nasty, and vaccination protects against much more serious illness. Right now, I'm feeling extremely grateful for that. Sturgeon's positive test came after she met with Sinn Féin Vice President and First Minister-designate of Northern Ireland, Michelle O'Neill, at Bute House on Friday. Sinn Féin confirmed that O'Neill had tested negative following the meeting. The First Minister had also travelled to the United States last week, where she addressed the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C., and met United States Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Report by Abby Garton-Crombie. The National, May 23. Labour accuses Sunak of using UK taxpayer cash to bolster public image. Report by Sean Bell. Rishi Sunak has been accused of spending taxpayer money on focus groups in an effort to repair his image. According to the Labour Party, new Treasury contracts reveal that researchers have been hired to conduct 2 focus groups, along with one online national pool each week until February of 2023, at a total 2-year outlay of over £1.35 million. These new contracts, argued Labour Deputy Leader Angela Rayner, were awarded after Sunak told the British people he had no money to ease the cost of living crisis and that cutting their energy bills would be silly. Rayner added, "The government apparently has £500,000 to spend on spin doctors, while Jacob Rees-Mogg is threatening to axe thousands of civil service jobs in the name of cost saving." At the start of the pandemic, the Treasury justified their spending on focus groups and polls as an emergency measure to test the impact of different policy options. But now this is little more than a taxpayer-funded vanity exercise for a Chancellor desperate to repair his image. Several previous contracts, including one worth £81,600 and given to Hanbury Strategy, founded by former Prime Minister David Cameron's former Director of Strategy, were necessary to inform governmental decisions following the advent of COVID-19, it was claimed. However, a new £500,000 contract with Delta Poll, described as being merely for the provision of public opinion focus groups and online polling, does not mention the pandemic in its purview Labour have argued. The Treasury has denied that the contracts are linked to any attempt to improve the Chancellor's public image. A Treasury spokesperson said, "The Treasury conducts regular polling to help develop and measure the impact and understanding of its policies. All polling is subject to the usual tender process, ensuring the best value for taxpayers' money." In April, a survey conducted by the Conservative Home website found that Sunak's popularity ranked at the bottom among senior cabinet ministers, with a net satisfaction rating of -5.2. This followed mounting criticism of his failure to do more in combating the cost of living crisis, as well as escalating controversy over the non-domiciled tax status of his wife, Akshata Murthy, which freed her from paying tax in the UK on her earnings abroad, and which she subsequently gave up. Along with Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the Chancellor was fined in April by the Met Police for attending a birthday gathering at number 10 Downing Street during the first national lockdown of the pandemic. Such developments would represent a sharp reversal in fortune for Sunak, who was once widely regarded as a likely heir to Johnson. Along with his wife, Akshata Murthy was this week named on the Sunday Times Rich list for the first time, with a joint fortune of £730 million. Report by Susan Bell.
From the National, Tuesday the 24th of May 2022, from the Politics section, desperate Tory bid to block release of secret union polling heads to court. Report by Xander Richards. The UK government is heading to court in a desperate bid to prevent the publication of internal polling on the union. In June 2021, the Tory administration was ordered to release the data it had collected on attitudes to Scotland's independence by a first-tier tribunal. The Cabinet Office was ordered to disclose the information requested by the SNP MP Tommy Shepherd under Freedom of Information laws within 28 days after its legal arguments against doing so were judged not wholly clear. However, it has refused to do so and instead appealed against the judge's ruling. That appeal will be heard in a tribunal on Tuesday. Shepherd said, "It has been almost a year now since the tribunal ruled that the information I requested on secret, taxpayer-funded polling into public attitudes towards the union must be made public, and they still continue to refuse. It is clear that the Tories are desperate to hide these results, and the only explanation for this is that it makes sense, is that it does not help their case for keeping Scotland under Westminster control." The Edinburgh East MP also pointed to public cash which had been set aside for the emergency COVID contracts, which the UK government instead used to poll on attitudes to the union. Top Tory Jacob Rees-Mogg insisted the spending had been completely proper and justifiable. Shepherd said, "This is a UK government that used the money for emergency COVID contracts from the public purse to commission political research on constitutional issues instead of for more PPE or to help doctors and nurses on the front line. The general public deserve to know how and why their money has been misspent, and it should not have to go to court to make that happen. They should have published the data a year ago after being told to do so by the Information Commissioner. The UK government must now publish these findings without delay." He added, "People are seeing the real cost of living with Westminster on a daily basis now. Every day we wake up to a new story about the Tory cost of living crisis and how millions are struggling because the Chancellor is cruelly failing to lift a finger to help, or new reports of the disastrous consequences of Brexit, or further sleaze, cronyism and corruption engulfing the Westminster government." A Cabinet Office spokesperson told The National last week the UK government regularly commissions research across the UK to understand public attitudes and behaviours, to inform our campaigns, policies, and to ensure we are delivering for people and families across the whole of the United Kingdom. The Scottish Government also conducts similar research for the same reasons, and we maintain that it is in the public interest to preserve a safe space for the development of policy and the provision of advice to ministers. The spokesperson said it would be inappropriate to comment further until the appeal has been heard. And that article is by Xander Richards. From the National, Tuesday the 24th of May 2022, from the Politics section, Ruth Davidson lays into Boris Johnson as Douglas Ross flirts with U-turn, by Angus Cochrane. Ruth Davidson has declared Boris Johnson's position untenable after pictures were published of the Prime Minister partying at a Downing Street leaving do during lockdown. The former Scottish Tory leader has piled further pressure on Douglas Ross to again reverse his position on whether Johnson should resign. The images showing the Prime Minister raising a glass, obtained by ITV News, were taken at a do for departing Communications Chief Lee Kane on 13th of November 2020, just days after Johnson had ordered a second national lockdown in England. Asked last December in the comments whether there had been a party in Number 10 on that date, the Prime Minister said no and added he was sure the rules were followed at all times. Opposition leaders say Johnson has undeniably lied to Parliament. The Prime Minister has also been accused of applying pressure to civil servant Sue Gray not to publish what is expected to be a highly damning report on her Partygate investigation. Ross has called on Johnson to explain himself. Davidson, who has consistently called for the PM to resign, went further. She told Channel 4 News on Monday evening, "There is now photographic evidence that when the Prime Minister stood up in Parliament and was asked directly, 'Was there a party in Number 10 on this date?' and he replied no, he lied to Parliament. I don't think his job is tenable and his position is tenable. The office of Prime Minister should be above being traduced by the person who holds it." Speaking to the BBC, the Baroness added, "We should not be ashamed of holding those we elect to high office, those that we put in leadership positions, to holding them to a higher standard. I think the public won't forget. They know what they were doing that November. They know what they gave up and what they sacrificed and what they were asked to sacrifice, while this man who was in charge and telling them to make all these sacrifices was holding up a glass of champagne in a room that was littered with empty bottles of wine, making a toast, making a speech and encouraging people to meet and socialise, knowing that he'd be on television saying that it was against the rules. I don't think the voters of this country will forget that in a hurry." Facing pressure to revert to a tougher stance on his Westminster boss, Ross did not accept an invitation to speak on the BBC's Good Morning Scotland on Tuesday. He said on Monday, "These images will rightly make people across the country very angry. The Prime Minister must outline why he believes this behaviour was acceptable. To most, these pictures seem unjustifiable and wrong." Meanwhile, the Metropolitan Police is facing questions as to why Johnson was not fined in relation to the event when photographs showed him, drink in hand, alongside a table strewn with food and wine bottles. There were at least 8 other people in the room at a time when people were banned from social mixing, other than to meet one person outside, and at least one individual has received a fixed penalty notice in relation to an event on that date. Lib Dem Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper has written to the Independent Office for Police Conduct, calling for it to examine the Met's Operation Hillman inquiry into events in Number 10 and Whitehall. The latest disclosures come as Sue Gray, the senior civil servant who instigated lockdown breaches in Whitehall, is preparing to publish her final report. Downing Street is understood to believe it is probable it will receive the senior civil servant's report on Wednesday. Supporters of the Prime Minister must have been groaning in confidence that he can survive calls for his resignation after receiving just one fine of a gathering in the Cabinet Office for his 56th birthday. But there is still nervousness at Westminster that his position could come under renewed pressure if, as many expect, Gray is highly critical of the culture in Number 10 and Whitehall, which resulted in repeated violations of the rules. The Times has reported Johnson saying to Gray that there was now no need for her to publish her report following the completion of the police investigation. The paper quoted a Whitehall source as saying, "He asked her was there much point in doing it now that it's all out there?" There was no immediate comment from Number 10. In the short term, Johnson's fate will lie with Tory MPs who'll have to decide whether Gray's findings are sufficiently serious to warrant a push to oust him as leader. veteran Conservative backbench MP Sir Roger Gale, a long-standing critic of the PM, said it was clear he should go. It's absolutely clear that there was a party, and he attended it, that he was raising a glass to toast one of his colleagues. And, therefore, he misled us from the dispatch box. And, honourably, there is one answer, he told Times Radio. A Number 10 spokesman said, the Cabinet Office and the Met Police have access to all information relevant to their investigations, including photographs. The Met have concluded their investigation, and Sue Gray will publish her report in the coming days, at which point the Prime Minister will address Parliament in full. And that was a report by Angus Cochrane. From the National, Tuesday the 24th of May 2022, from the news section. MPs demand Foreign Office Chief's exit over deep failures on Afghanistan evacuation, by George Gaynor. Afghan allies and British soldiers were utterly let down by deep failures of leadership in the UK government during the evacuation from Kabul, MPs have said, as they demanded the resignation of the Foreign Office's top civil servant. A scathing report published today calls for Sir Philip Barton to consider his position over a determination to avoid unearthing the facts during an inquiry by the Cross-Party Foreign Affairs Committee. Then Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab and Barton's failure to return from holiday, as Kabul fell in August last year, marked a fundamental lack of seriousness, grip or leadership, the MP said. Leaders at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, were told to be ashamed that civil servants had to risk their careers by blowing the whistle to unearth the appalling mismanagement of the crisis as the Taliban swept to power. The MPs also said they are yet to hear a possible alternative explanation to Prime Minister Boris Johnson approving the controversial evacuation of the Nowzad animal charity. The committee said the withdrawal was a disaster and a betrayal of British allies that will damage the UK's interests for years to come. Ministers were accused of having a total absence of a plan for Afghans who supported the British mission, despite knowing for 18 months that the evacuations may be necessary if the US withdrew its troops. The hasty efforts to select individuals for airlift was poorly devised, managed and staffed, with a lack of clarity causing confusion and false hope among our Afghan partners who were desperate for rescue. They, and the many civil servants and soldiers working hard on the evacuation, were utterly let down by deep failures of leadership in government, the committee said. The FCDO was accused of giving intentionally evasive and often deliberately misleading responses to the committee's investigations. Barton displayed a worrying lack of knowledge of the department he leads and a determination to avoid unearthing the facts, the MP said. Conservative MP Tom Tugendhat, who chairs the committee, said, the UK's part in this tragedy exposes a lack of seriousness in achieving coordination, a lack of clear decision making, a lack of leadership and a lack of accountability. While junior officials demonstrated courage and integrity, chaotic and arbitrary decision making runs through this inquiry. The government issued a statement defending staff working tirelessly to evacuate more than 15,000 people from Afghanistan in a fortnight. This was the biggest UK mission of its kind in generations and followed months of intensive planning and collaboration between UK government departments, a spokesman said. We carried out a thorough review to learn the lessons from our withdrawal from Afghanistan and have drawn on many of the findings in our response to the conflict in Ukraine, including introducing new systems for managing correspondence. And that was an article by George Gaynor. From the National, Tuesday the 24th of May 2022, from the news section. Pictures emerge of Boris Johnson drinking during lockdown at boozy party, by Hamish Morrison. Pictures showing the Prime Minister drinking at a party during lockdown and raising a toast have been published. The images, obtained by ITV News, have been released online and show Boris Johnson holding a glass in the air at one point to a room full of other people during what is believed to be a leaving party on November the 13th, 2020. They also show bottles of red, white and sparkling wine on a table alongside a bottle of hand sanitizer and one of the traditional red ministerial briefcases. One shows the Prime Minister with his arm aloft, apparently making a toast. The other participants have been blurred out of the pictures by ITV. Also on the table before Johnson and the other participants are empty glasses of wine, a takeaway food box, what appears to be a bottle of spirits, biscuits and crisps. The event is reported as being held in honour of the departing Communications Director Lee Kane, and the pictures show 8 people standing close together, not including the photographer. Ian Blackford, the SNP's Westminster leader, said, "These pictures clearly show, as the police investigation concluded, that parties did indeed take place at Downing Street during lockdown, and that the Prime Minister was there. It is sickening." Boris Johnson told us firstly that no parties took place during lockdown. Then he said he wasn't at them, and that he was angry about them. He is a serial liar and cannot be allowed to get away with it. It is truly a disgrace that Tory MPs are keeping him in Downing Street. He demeans the office that he holds. It is time for them to do the decent thing, for once, and get rid of him. This charlatan should be an ex-Prime Minister by now. Can the Prime Minister tell the House whether there was a party in Downing Street on 13th November? Asked Labour's Catherine West. The Prime Minister has previously denied there was a party in Downing Street on the date the pictures were taken. Asked by Labour's Catherine West whether there was a party in his home on November the 13th, the Prime Minister responded, "No, but I'm sure that whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times." It comes amid reports that the upcoming Sugiri report, due to be published imminently, will contain photographs exposing rule breaking in the corridors of power during lockdown. A Number 10 spokesperson said, "The Cabinet Office and the Met Police have had access to all information relevant to their investigations, including photographs. The Met have concluded their investigation, and Sue Gray will publish her report in the coming days, at which point the Prime Minister will address Parliament in full." The Metropolitan Police confirmed last week they had wrapped their investigations into Downing Street lawbreaking during the pandemic. Scotland Yard handed out 126 to 83 people, including the Prime Minister, wife Carrie Johnson, and Chancellor Rishi Sunak. The event pictured is not one the Prime Minister was fined for, though the Daily Mirror reports the party was instigated by Johnson, who poured out booze for others. England had been plunged into strict lockdown following a rise in COVID-19 cases just 8 days before the photographs were taken. Johnson will face MPs following the fresh revelations on Wednesday for Prime Minister's questions. He's also going to be subject of a Privileges Committee investigation into whether he lied to Parliament about knowingly breaking the rules. Photo evidence is thought to make it harder for the Prime Minister to argue he was not aware he was acting illegally. And that report was by Hamish Morrison. From the National, Tuesday the 24th of May 2022, from the news section, Ukrainian Chapel in Scotland wins vital funding to secure future, by Stuart Ward. The future of a Ukrainian chapel that opened after the Second World War has been secured. Lockerby's Halmuir Ukrainian Chapel has been given a grant of more than £50,000 by South of Scotland Enterprise, SOSE. The cash will allow for vital repairs to the Grade B listed building and improve its hard landscaping and surrounding boundary. It will also see the development of a visitor centre and further work on promoting the chapel, with a collaboration to be undertaken with the South of Scotland Destination Alliance. Equalities Minister Christina McKelvey said, "I'm delighted that the Halmuir Ukrainian Chapel has received a grant from the South of Scotland Enterprise to continue its important work supporting people in Locherbend and Frisia." The chapel first opened in the years following World War II to support Ukrainian soldiers working in the local community. 75 years on, it will now also be a place of sanctuary and support for displaced people from Ukraine now arriving in Scotland. This funding will enable the restoration of the chapel building and the opening of a visitor centre so that people can learn about their important work and history. I hope that this support means communities can continue to come together at the Homir Ukrainian Chapel for many years to come. The chapel has been undergoing repairs and developments in phases since 2018, but progress has been hindered by winter storms and the COVID pandemic. The chapel did not qualify for any government grants or subsidies, which left its team less than halfway towards a target of £80,000 in summer 2021. However, in October 2021, the chapel successfully approached Economic and Community Development Agency SOSE for support. The building was first repurposed as a chapel by Ukrainian prisoners of war in the years following the Second World War, when more than 400 Ukrainian soldiers were sent to work on nearby farms and forestry. Many Ukrainians chose to stay in the Dumfriesshire area after the war. Church services are held regularly for locals. The chapel has become a focal point for gathering humanitarian aid for those who are caught up in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Maitos Akapo of Homir Chapel said, "It has been a long process to get where we are today, and we have faced several unprecedented challenges along the way. Closing our doors to visitors during the pandemic made fundraising particularly difficult, but we knew we couldn't give up on such an important pillar of our local Ukrainian community in Dumfriesshire. We are pleased to have now received funding from SOSE to get repair work underway to restore the chapel. It has proved a critical location for collection of donations during the ongoing Ukraine conflict, and we hope it will continue to be an important venue for years to come." SOSE Chair Professor Russell Griggs hailed the chapel as an asset to the local community. He said, "It is vital that we do everything we can to help preserve buildings such as this, which are steeped in history and serve a very important purpose to the people that use them. Our funding will help to ensure the safety and longevity of the building so that it remains a key part of the local community for years to come." And that article is by Stuart Ward. From the National, Tuesday the 24th of May 2022, from the news section, "It's time to step up. UN pleads with billionaires amid food insecurity rise with Ukraine war," by George Gaynor. The head of the UN's World Food Programme, WFP, told billionaires it is time to step up as the global threat of food insecurity rises with Russia's war in Ukraine. Agency Executive Director David Beasley said he has seen encouraging signs from some of the world's richest people, like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. He built upon a social media back and forth he had with Musk last year, when the Tesla CEO challenged policy advocates to show how a $6 billion, £4.8 billion, donation could solve world hunger. Since then, Musk put $6 billion into a foundation, but everybody thought it came to us, but we ain't gotten any of it yet, so I'm hopeful, Beasley said at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, where some of the world's biggest elites gathered. "I don't know what it's going to take," he said of Musk. "We're trying every angle, you know. Elon, we need your help, brother." Musk and Bezos did not immediately respond to emails or other messages seeking comment. Musk, the world's richest man, donated about 5 million shares of company stock worth roughly $5.7 billion, £4.5 billion, to an unidentified charity in November, according to a regulatory filing. It came after Musk tweeted in late October that he would sell $6 billion, £4.8 billion, in Tesla stock and give the money to the World Food Programme if the organisation could show how the money would solve world hunger. The UN Securities and Exchange Commission filing did not name any recipients of Musk's donation. Beasley said yesterday his message was not just to those two high-profile tech mavens, but other billionaires too. "The world is in real serious trouble. This is not rhetoric and BS. Step up now, because the world needs you," he said. Ukraine and Russia together export a third of the world's wheat and barley and half of its sunflower oil, while Russia is a top supplier of fertiliser that has surged in price. The Kremlin's forces are accused of blocking Ukrainian ports, and the interruption of those affordable food staples is threatening food shortages and political unrest in countries in Africa, the Middle East and Asia. The threat to the global food supply has been a pressing concern for officials. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said last week that he was in intense contact with Russia and other key countries and is hopeful of an agreement. This would allow the exportation of grains stored in Ukrainian ports and ensure Russian food and fertiliser have unrestricted access to global markets. If Ukraine's supplies remain off the market, the world could face a food availability programme in the next 10 to 12 months. That is going to be hell on earth, Beasley said. And that was a report by George Gaynor.
Recorded from the National on the 24th of May 2022. From the Culture section, British Pipe Band Championships back with a bang in superb Greenock event by Steph Braun. The first British Pipe Band Championships in almost 3 years has been hailed a huge success after the event was held in Greenock. This showpiece, the first major of the season, took place at the town's Battery Park on Saturday, May 21st, with thousands in attendance. More than 105 bands entered, including some from the US, Canada, Ireland, England, and several from across Scotland. Despite the rain earlier in the day, visitors enjoyed top-class performances, Highland dancing, a variety of stalls, and food as they enjoyed a day out at the free event on the banks of the River Clyde. It was organised by Inverclyde Council in partnership with the Royal Scottish Pipe Band Association, RSPBA. Chieftain of the Games and former Inverclyde Provost, Ciano Ribici, said, "Forget the weather, everything was great and went very well. The bands, Highland dancers, everything was great." The competitors enjoyed it, and the rest of the people there enjoyed it too. We had bands from America, Ireland, England and Scotland, and that speaks for itself. Battery Park was superb, the grass was great and the views are tremendous. We couldn't have asked for more, and hopefully it brings more people into the area. The Games followed hot on the heels of the successful Gourock Highland Games a fortnight earlier, and were part of the Inverclyde Council's Mealara Festival of events throughout May and June. Ian Embleton, Chief Executive of the RSPBA, said, "It was a very good day and all went well. The bands had a fantastic time at what was the first major championships they have had for nearly 3 years. They loved every minute of it. The whole event ran like clockwork. Yes, the weather wasn't the best, we live in Scotland after all, but the bands weren't bothered and we had a dry afternoon. We had 105 bands entered, the turnout far exceeded our expectations to get over 100 bands. It was an outstanding success." First place in each of the pipe band contests are as follows. Grade 1, Inverarian District. Grade 2, Buchan Peterson. Grade 3A, Vale of Atholl. Grade 3B, Major Sinclair Memorial. Grand Juvenile, Dollar Academy. Grade 4A, Lower Clyde Pipes and Drums. Grade 4B, Kilbarchan Pipe Band. Grade Novice, Juvenile A, Dollar Academy. Grade Novice, Juvenile B, High School of Dundee. Adult Drum Major Heats, Cara Gilmore, Police Scotland Confederation. Adult Drum Major Final, James Kennedy, Closkelt. Juvenile Drum Major, Louis Anderson, New Ross and District Ayr. Junior Drum Major, Carice Graham, the Glasgow Sky Association. For the full results, visit the RSPBA website. The article was by Steph Braun. Recorded from the National on the 24th of May 2022. From the Culture section, Kirkcaldy Music Festival featuring Big Country called off due to UK economic climate by Steph Braun. A 3-day music festival which was due to raise cash for the NHS has been called off due to insufficient ticket sales, with organisers blaming the state of the economy. The inaugural Kirkcaldy Breakout Festival was due to take place from May 27th to 29th on the town's esplanade, with stellar acts including Big Country, Wet 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 and Mid-Ure lined up to perform. But organisers have blamed the current economic climate for poor ticket sales, which has led to them being unable to hold it. Other artists booked to perform included Callum Beattie, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Hue and Cry and Sandy Tom. The main stage was due to be named after local singer Paige Dougal, who died aged 17 in January after battling Ewing's sarcoma, a disease that attacks the bones. Kirkcaldy MP Neil Hanvey said the cancellation was a sign of just how much the cost of living crisis is beginning to bite. He said, "I am deeply disappointed that Breakout has had to be cancelled. I know firsthand how hard Ian Arnott and his team have worked to pull this event off, and it's such a shame the local band selected to play on the main stage will now not realise that ambition. The impact of the cost of living crisis is really beginning to bite, and folk just don't have any spare cash. What is most frustrating is that the current economic circumstances were a completely predictable consequence of Tory economic policy. The Chancellor has the means and the opportunity to stop this crisis in its tracks, but he chooses not to do so. This is as clear an illustration you can get that poverty is a deliberate political choice, and why Scotland must unshackle itself from Westminster rule completely as a matter of great urgency. In a statement posted on social media, organisers said the decision to cancel had been taken with enormous regret. It continued, "It is with enormous regret that we have to announce the cancellation of Breakout. The current economic climate has contributed to the level of ticket sales that make the live events unviable. We would like to offer all our thanks to the band's partner agencies and suppliers who have continued to give us their full support right to the last minute. The festival was originally due to take place last October, but organisers decided to delay it due to a spike in COVID cases caused by the Omicron variant. As well as the main stage, the plans featured a fairground and an acoustic tent which would become a dance tent at night." The article was by Steph Braun.
The National News on Wednesday the 25th of May. Taxis to carry life-saving overdose drug. An article written by Judith Duffy. Taxi drivers in Scotland's capital city are to start carrying the life-saving drug naloxone, which can help those who have suffered an opioid drugs overdose. Drugs Policy Minister Angela Constance welcomed the move involving drivers with Central Taxis, saying it would save lives. The cab company is the largest taxi operator in Edinburgh, with 36 of its drivers having already agreed to carry out the necessary training to administer the drug, enabling them to carry it in their vehicles. Police officers, the ambulance service and members of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service already carry naloxone. Julie McCartney, the Scottish Ambulance Service's drug harm reduction lead for the East of Scotland, said, "This forms part of a wider catalogue of work by the Scottish Ambulance Service to maximise every opportunity to support those who use drugs to access treatment and support direct from the scene of an emergency." An article written by Judith Duffy. The National News on Wednesday the 25th of May. Third Scots Osprey chick hatches. An article written by Lewis McKinley. The last of 3 osprey chicks has hatched at the Loch of the Lowes Wildlife Reserve in Perthshire. The final egg hatched at 7:46 p.m. on Monday after a small hole was spotted in its marbled egg the previous evening. After hatching, male osprey LM12 returned to the nest with a perch to feed his newly hatched family. Unfortunately, LM12 has sustained an eye injury, which is believed to be minor, but will be monitored over the coming weeks. Sarah Rasmussen, Perthshire Ranger for the Scottish Wildlife Trust, commented, "It's fantastic that all of NC0's eggs have hatched this season. Our team of staff and volunteers have worked around the clock to ensure the ospreys can breed successfully without being disturbed. It's immensely satisfying to know that the long days and nights protecting the nest have paid off, and ongoing monitoring will contribute to the next step in the chick's remarkable journey. We'll continue to keep an eye on the young ospreys as they grow, and hopefully all 3 youngsters will successfully fledge and migrate south at the end of the summer." Ospreys have only started to recover in numbers since the 1960s, after they became extinct in Britain for much of the 20th century. According to the RSPB, the osprey recolonised in 1954 after Scandinavian birds migrated to the UK. Now, around 300 osprey pairs breed together every summer, consistently contributing to the growth in population. The ever-growing numbers are also attributed to efforts made by conservation charities in Scotland, such as the Scottish Wildlife Trust. The public can visit Loch of the Lowes 7 days a week and can also view the osprey activity on the Trust's live webcam from anywhere in the world. An article written by Lewis McKinley. The National News on Wednesday the 25th of May. Lorraine Kelly recalls Dunblane killings as she backs United States gun reform in the wake of Uvalde shooting. An article written by Laura Webster, News and Features Editor. Lorraine Kelly has described the Texas elementary school shooting as appalling and shocking and called for tighter gun control laws like those put in place after the Dunblane massacre of 1996. At least 19 children and 2 adults have been reported dead after a teenage gunman opened fire at Robb Elementary School in the US city of Uvalde. During her morning show on ITV, Scottish television presenter Miss Kelly, 62, became emotional as she spoke to reporter Ross King in Los Angeles. She said, "Truly appalling and shocking news from the United States overnight. Here we are again, another mass shooting, and it doesn't seem to ever end." Referring to President Joe Biden, she added, "He's the President of the United States. He has to try to do something. Of course he has." Ms. Kelly questioned whether changing the language around the debate in the United States from gun control to gun safety could help move it forward. She added, "I don't know what we can do, but you know for sure that we're going to be talking about this again, and that is what is so enraging, that this will happen again. And thoughts and prayers, I'm sorry, that's just not going to cut it. It just isn't. They've got to do something, definitely." Ms. Kelly has been a vocal advocate for gun safety after she reported on the Dunblane shooting in March 1996, which saw Thomas Hamilton kill 16 pupils and their teacher in the gym hall of Dunblane Primary School before shooting himself. She said things did change because the families made it change. They had to lobby very hard, and obviously people in the country wanted to help as well and signed the petition and changed the law, which is a remarkable achievement for families who are grieving. But in America, they don't seem to have the same sort of support. Surely any rational person would want to change this to protect our children and our teachers. It doesn't make any sense at all. The Texas shooting is the deadliest at a US primary school since the infamous Sandy Hook shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, in which 20 children and 6 adults were killed almost a decade ago. Hollywood star Matthew McConaughey, who was born in Uvalde, said the recent spate of mass shootings across America is an epidemic we can control, and that whichever side of the aisle we may stand on, we all know that we can do better. Pop megastar Taylor Swift shared a video of Golden State Warriors coach Steve Kerr, who delivered an emotional message in a press conference before the NBA Western Conference Finals. "Filled with rage and grief, and so broken by the murders in Uvalde," she wrote in a tweet. Oscars co-host Amy Schumer added, "We're grieving with the Uvalde community, a predominantly Latin community, and everyone else impacted by yet another senseless act of violence in our schools." Captain America star Chris Evans, meanwhile, wrote in all capitals, "F with 6 asterisks, enough." An article written by Laura Webster. The National Politics on Wednesday the 25th of May. Nicola Sturgeon tells Greater Govan Hill she's very often misrepresented. An article written by Xander Richards, political reporter. "My words are very often misrepresented," Nicola Sturgeon has said as she criticised the ridiculous media coverage which followed her not wearing a mask inside a barber shop. The First Minister made the comments while speaking to Greater Govan Hill, a free quarterly magazine from her Holyrood constituency, as part of a wide-ranging interview touching on trans rights, the Ukraine war and UK immigration policy, amongst other things. Ms Sturgeon had previously promised to speak to the local publication during 2021's Govan Hill International Festival, arranged by the Govan Hill Bath Community Trust. The SNP leader was grilled by a group of young people learning journalism skills with the magazine thanks to funding from the National Lottery and a community grant from KFC. Rhiannon Davis, Greater Govan Hill's founding editor, told The National the young interviews had been given free rein with their questions, which led to a good range of topics being covered. Ms Davis said the magazine had been directed and led locally since it was first conceived in 2019 and printed in 2020, and that it would not have fit its ethos to have anyone but people from the community quiz the First Minister. Asked about trans rights, with Southside Central having recently elected Glasgow's first trans councillor, Ms Sturgeon said she believed there was a very vocal minority, which meant the debate around the topic was often overstated. The SNP leader said she believed that both in society in general and in her party there was a consensus in favour of gender reform. She added, "I accept that concerns come from a place of sincerity, but there are others trying to weaponise this debate for reasons of transphobia. I've been a feminist for as long as I can remember, and I get very frustrated at the suggestion that standing up for trans rights is somehow denigrating women's rights." Ms Sturgeon said there were many other threats to women's rights right now, pointing to the battle around abortion in the United States. Elsewhere, the First Minister also said there were parallels between how women were treated during the witch trials and how they're received on social media today. Asked about her apology to the women tried and killed for witchcraft, Ms Sturgeon said, "Obviously women are no longer tried for being witches, but with the abuse that women get on social media and in society generally, and the way in which women in the criminal justice system are often treated and misunderstood, I do think there are still parallels. I think recognising some of the historic aspects of this helps us to feel what we need to do to continue to sort things out." Ms Sturgeon was further asked about comments she had made soon after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, in which she called on NATO not to rule out a no-fly zone over the Eastern European nation. The remarks, which the First Minister has repeatedly stood by, led to her being branded naive by Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack. However, Ms Sturgeon told Greater Govan Hill she believed her words had been misrepresented, as is very often the case. She explained, "What I was saying more generally was questioning the decision on the part of NATO to be very explicit with Vladimir Putin about what was off the table, which could give him a free hand to think he could do certain things without consequences. I think if your starting position with someone like him is to say that no matter what you do, we're not going to take action beyond a certain point, are we not giving him too much of a green light?" The First Minister also touched on the topic of the Tory government's immigration policy, which has come into stark focus following the refugee crisis sparked by the Ukraine war. Ms Sturgeon said that asylum and immigration was clearly a key aspect of the culture war the Tories are fighting. She said, "I hate the whole debate about immigration in the UK. I think that it's slightly better in Scotland, but we shouldn't be complacent. I absolutely abhor the Tory approach to immigration. That policy of sending people to Rwanda is one of the most disgusting things that I think I've ever heard. Coming from a Tory government, that is a big statement." An article written by Xander Richards. The National News on Wednesday the 25th of May. Moves to avoid rail chaos at qualifier World Cup match. An article written by Steph Braun, multimedia political journalist. Plans are in place to ensure Scotland fans can get to and from Hampden Park for the World Cup qualifier against Ukraine next week, amid major cuts to ScotRail services, the Transport Minister has said. Jenny Gilruth was questioned in Holyrood yesterday about ScotRail's temporary timetable, which was launched this week amid a pay dispute between ScotRail bosses and railway unions. Hundreds of services have been pulled from the tracks as a result, disturbing many people's daily commutes. And football fans are particularly anxious about how cuts could affect their ability to get back home after Scotland's crucial World Cup playoff match on Wednesday, June the 1st. It's one of Scotland's most important matches in the past 20 years, with the team having not qualified for a World Cup since 1998, and more than 50,000 fans will head for the National Stadium for the Crunch qualifier. But services from Glasgow to Dundee and Aberdeen will already have ended before the crucial World Cup playoff match has even kicked off at 7:45 p.m, and Edinburgh-based members of the Tartan Army will be unable to get home if the game goes to extra time, as the last train from Queen Street to Waverley leaves at 10:15 p.m. There are also no services from near the stadium in Mount Florida to Glasgow city centre around the time the game is due to end. But Ms Gilruth said she's been assured plans are in place to get fans back safely and details will be publicised soon. She said, "I do understand the concerns of supporters planning to attend the Scotland match. This is, of course, Scotland's most important game in a long time, and we want to ensure supporters get to and from the match on public transport, including using bus services. I would note that the last train from Glasgow to Aberdeen would have been at 21:40 before the timetable changes, so this still would not have been late enough to get people back. I asked ScotRail for an update on this last Friday, and they've assured me plans are in place and they will publicise details of this in due course, and I'll be meeting with them tomorrow to discuss this and get updates on the negotiations with ASLEF. About 700 train services a day were axed on Monday the 23rd of May. The summer 2022 timetable had about 2,150 weekday services, but this has now been reduced to 1,456 in the temporary timetable. Train drivers' union ASLEF is balloting members for a strike action after rejecting a 2.2% pay offer. The RMT union, which covers other rail workers, has also announced it will hold a strike ballot over pay. MSP Tess White asked Ms Gilruth if discussions had taken place with sports and events sectors in light of the temporary timetable being introduced. Lib Dem MSP Willie Rennie raised concerns about the Open due to take place in July in St Andrews, while Tory MSP Jeremy Balfour expressed his fears about people falling out of attending the Edinburgh International Festival because they may not be able to get back home. Ms Gilruth said she hoped the dispute would be resolved by the summer, adding, "While we want the temporary timetable to be in place for as short as time as possible, engagement is also ongoing with individual events as required." An article written by Steph Braun. The National News on Wednesday the 25th of May. Former officer claims Bayou left her fearful and scared. An article written by Jane Cassidy. A former police officer ran from Sheku Bayou after being overwhelmed by terror before falling to the ground with a blow to the head, the inquiry into his death heard. Nicole Short said she felt fearful and scared when she arrived at the scene in Kirkcaldy on May the 3rd, 2015. She claimed later that she had a genuine belief that he was going to get up and finish me off. An inquiry into the circumstances of Mr Bayou's death and whether race was a factor is taking place in Edinburgh. Miss Short, who is 5 foot 1 inch tall, was one of the officers responding to calls that Mr Bayou, 31, was carrying a knife at the town's Hayfield Road just after 7 a.m. She cried briefly before giving her evidence. The inquiry's senior counsel, Angela Graham QC, read out part of a statement from Miss Short. She told the inquiry, "I just felt because of my build, essentially, if I was to get stabbed, it will probably increase chances of it being fatal." Describing how she arrived at the scene on Hayfield Road, Miss Short said, "I was fearful, I was scared. I felt like my priority was to deal with what was in front of me." Miss Short said she saw Mr Bayou walking away from 2 other officers after they had sprayed him, wiping it away from his face like it was water. She said Mr Bayou was unresponsive, saying it was like he was on a mission. She claimed his muscles were massive, they were bulging out of his top. Miss Short, who is 36, said that when she drew her baton and ordered Mr Bayou to get on the ground, he shouted, "F with 3-star, ing, come on then," and began boxing, skipping towards her. She said Mr Bayou then moved towards her, and as he got close to her, she said she instinctively ran away. "Being completely overwhelmed with terror is the best way I could describe it." She said she felt an almighty blow to the back of her head and fell to the ground. Another officer picked her up by the stab vest and told her to go back to the van, and she was later taken to hospital, she said. She told the inquiry she saw Mr Bayou lifting 3 officers off the ground as they struggled with him. However, she claimed the level of restraint shown by officers against Mr Bayou was completely in line with his actions. When asked whether her colleagues would have employed the same tactics if Mr Bayou had been white, Miss Short said, "The colour of his skin had no bearing on how we reacted to that call whatsoever." Yesterday morning, supporters of Sheku Bayou's family took the knee outside the inquiry. The group gathered outside Capitol House in Edinburgh as members of the 31-year-old's family arrived to watch the proceedings. Mr Bayou's mother, Aminata Bayou, and his sister, Caddy Johnson, arrived yesterday morning to chants of Black Lives Matter and No Justice, No Peace, No Racist Police from about 50 protesters, who Aminata Bayou thanked for their solidarity. Present with the family was their lawyer, Amma Anwar. Speaking about Mr Bayou's family, Mr Anwar said they've been fighting for justice for some 7 years now, and this struggle is not over. When Sheku died in police custody 7 years ago, he was a 31-year-old man. He was unarmed, which we know is factually correct. He was walking down the street. Police had been called to an incident after they received reports that a black man had been acting erratically and carrying a knife. When the police arrived, Sheku was unarmed. People should know that up to 7 police officers were involved in the restraint of Sheku Bayou. His family at the time didn't ask for anything special. They asked for justice. Justice should be a right and not a privilege. The family spoke some 2 weeks after Sheku died. They refused to speculate, and they always said if Sheku broke the law, then the police had a right to act. But any force used had to be reasonable, legitimate and proportionate. His family then began a campaign for justice, and some 4 years later they were denied that justice by the Lord Advocate, and they were told there would be no charges brought. The family are asking for this inquiry to be robust, to be impartial, and to deliver the truth to this family, because they know without the truth they will never get justice. Our justice system in this country likes to talk about being colour-blind. As far as Sheku Bayu's family is concerned, the colour of his skin, his blackness, was used as a weapon. It was seen as a weapon. We're in now for the long haul. This inquiry is expected to last 2 or 3 years. Today is a critical day. If we march for George Floyd, if black lives actually matter in Scotland, then it requires all those hundreds, if not thousands of people who turned up for George Floyd. They've been fighting for justice for some 7 years now, and this struggle is not over. The inquiry was told Miss Short has been rendered permanently disabled from injuries she sustained on the day of Mr. Bayou's death. Roddy Dunlop QC, who represents Miss Short and another officer, said, "It would be naive to think that the events of that day have not had material impact on the lives of the families of the officers who attended the scene that day." Mr. Dunlop said there have been accusations of racism directed against those officers, and such vilification has a lasting impact. The inquiry is still ongoing. An article written by Jane Cassidy.
Recorded from the National on the 26th of May 2022, from the Culture section. Goodfellows actor Ray Liotta dies aged 67, by Katie Collier. Actor Ray Liotta, known for his appearances in Goodfellows, has passed away aged 67, according to US media. The American actor's representative confirmed he had died in his sleep. Ray Liotta found fame when he played Ray Sinclair in Something Wild, a 1986 film, and he received a Golden Globe nomination for his work. Liotta also appeared in the film Field of Dreams and the game Grand Theft Auto Vice City, plus more. More recently, he appeared in The Many Saints of New York and starred alongside Taron Egerton in Blackbird, the Apple TV series. Liotta was engaged to JC Natola and was father to daughter Carson. Fans take to Twitter to post messages regarding death of Ray Liotta. Alongside a crying face emoji, one tweeted, "R.I.P. Ray Liotta, legend, legend, legend." Another tweeted, "R.I.P. Ray Liotta." A third tweeted, "Ray Liotta is easily one of the actors I can't help but get excited about when he pops up in a film. He makes every performance a memorable one." A fourth tweeted, "R.I.P. Goodfellow Ray Liotta." The article was by Katie Collier. Recorded from the National on the 26th of May 2022. From the Culture section. Depeche Mode keyboardist Andy Fletcher dies aged 60, band confirms. By Ninian Wilson. Depeche Mode's keyboardist Andy Fletcher has died at the age of 60, the band has announced. Fletcher, nicknamed Fletch, founded the group in Basildon in 1980 and was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 2 years ago. In a statement, Depeche Mode said, "We are shocked and filled with overwhelming sadness with the untimely passing of our dear friend, family member and bandmate. Fletch had a true heart of gold and was always there when you needed support, a lively conversation, a good laugh or a cold pint." Lol Tolhurst, drummer with The Cure, shared a heartfelt tribute to Fletcher after news of his death broke. "Very sad news today. Andy Fletcher of Depeche Mode has passed," he tweeted. "I knew Andy and considered him a friend. We crossed many of the same pathways as younger men. My heart goes out to his family, bandmates and DM fans. R.I.P. Fletch." The article was by Ninian Wilson.
And that was this week's The National Podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes with the publisher's kind permission. Thanks for listening.